So I just want to echo a thought that Mr. Seitz was talking about. I believe it's time for the Police Commission to actually fulfill its function. And I don't believe that it can, given the current makeup of the Police Commission. We have 3 commissioners who are currently on the commission who were there when they gave Chief Kealoha the highest ranking they could for his performance. They gave him a new contract a year early. They refused to investigate allegations that there was something wrong in the department. Even when this case broke 2 years ago, they refused to talk to anyone who was actually involved to find out what was happening. And those 3 members of the commission who are still on today trying to decide who the new police chief is going to be should have no role in that process. I think they should resign voluntarily. If they don't, I think the mayor should ask for their resignation. I think we need people on the commission who are willing to perform their job, willing to do it competently and ably. And so I echo Mr. Seitz's thoughts that right now the police commission isn't providing proper oversight and really needs to be revamped. And I believe that given that we're in this process of electing a new chief of police, we need the proper people there to do it.
Allie, two years ago, you're looking at a video, this grainy video that looks nothing like your client. What are your thoughts today?
Well, we've come a long way. It's been 2 years. Well, it's been longer than that. I got this case in June of 2013. The trial was in December 2014. We brought this to the FBI in January of 2015, and the grand jury started in October or November of 2015. So it's been a long time coming. Mr. Girard and his family, who have been the ones who've been put through the ringer, he was arrested, he was put in prison, he was subject to the news for 2 years where everybody presumed he was guilty. It's a long time coming for them. I think they're very appreciative and happy that this day is here. You know, really this is about justice. This is about the abuse of power at the highest positions in the government by the people that we entrust to enforce the law, not break the law. And the indictment is really an incredible document that outlines massive corruption by these individuals over spanning years. And I think it was just happenstance that it got uncovered. You know, but for this case coming into federal court, and but for my office's ability to actually spend the money and the time and the resources to investigate it, none of this would have even been an inkling of what was found. And all we did was start the ball rolling. The U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General, and the Special Prosecutor really obviously have the resources and the ability and the means to see this through, and we appreciate their efforts.
Was there one specific thing that really triggered this for much bigger than what it was at the time?
There were a couple things that really struck us when we started with this case. But the obvious thing that got us was, one, the videotape. It was very clear it wasn't him. Everybody I showed it to immediately stated it couldn't have been him. But then when you realize, and I know this really didn't come out in the indictment, they lied about the manufacturer, the make and model of the mailbox. In the police reports, they describe a completely different mailbox that they claim was stolen than the one that was actually in front of their house. And they did that because they thought this case was going to be prosecuted in state court and they needed it to be a felony, which meant they needed a very expensive mailbox to have been taken instead of the one that was actually there. So in the beginning of this case, when we uncovered that they had actually lied about the make and model of the mailbox, we knew that there was something seriously wrong.
And the calls that you made for the commissioners to step down, had you relayed those concerns to the mayor at all, or anyone on the police commission? This is the first we're hearing of it.
No one in city government or state government has ever reached out to me in any form whatsoever. No one's interested in having known what was going on for the last 2 years, having inquired of the person who probably, myself in my office, knew most about what was happening. No one, not a single phone call has been made to me asking me to provide information.
Do you think there'll be any impact on Kealoha's cases at all, which was handled previously?
Say that again?
Do you think that there'll be any impact on any of the cases that Kealoha has handled in the prosecutor's
Oh,
office?
absolutely. I'm a defense attorney. If I were in the state court and Catherine Kealoha touched a case, or any of these officers touched one of my cases, I'd be moving to dismiss those cases. I'd be moving for discovery, for disciplinary action, for reports, for misconduct in every one of those cases. I think she has jeopardized a lot of cases that are pending in state court by her actions and her inability and her unwillingness to step aside. And that goes to the highest reaches of the state prosecutor's office.
How much of what's in today and yesterday's indictment were you aware of?
It's a small town. I was certainly aware of all the information related to the mailbox theft and the false reporting and the false documents. And in fact, there's a lot more that isn't contained in the indictment, but they can say that as evidence. But as to the other facts, our investigation uncovered some of those facts, not obviously as detailed and thorough as the prosecutors have done.
You mean the bank prosecutor?
That's correct. You know, when I investigate a case, I have to focus on what is relevant to my case. And while we uncovered some of that evidence, it wasn't necessarily relevant, at least as I saw it, to my case, so we kind of let those issues go.
Now, you mentioned, do you know whose idea it was to forward the case to U.S. Postal Inspection Service?
I certainly spent some time trying to figure out how this case came into federal court. I've not been able to determine how that actually happened.
And there's also blames for the U.S. Postal Inspection Service for not properly investigating it, doing their own investigation, and for the U.S. attorneys for taking the case without the proper evidence.
Well, what they did and didn't do is not for me to comment upon. I'm just very appreciative that when we presented the evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office, they saw it for what it was. They made the referral to the FBI because they saw it for what it was, and I'm very appreciative that we're standing here today, even though it's 2 years later, now, finally, with the beginning of what I think is going to be a very long process.
Thank goodness there's somebody referred to the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, whoever it is, right?
Somebody did. I don't know how that happened. I do think this. I don't think the Kealohas or the architects of this conspiracy thought that this was ever going to end up in federal court. I don't think they wanted it to end up in federal court. I think for whatever reason, the state didn't prosecute it, and they were so desperate to get Mr. Puana prosecuted that it ended up in federal court. And luckily, my office is not as overworked as the state public defender's office. We have a lot more resources, and we can spend the time and the money to do an investigation that otherwise I don't think would have been done necessarily, not because lawyers didn't want to do it, because they probably don't have the resources that we do.
So you said that the KLOs probably didn't want this or expect this to end up in federal court, but the alleged conspiracy involves the theft of a mailbox, which most people think would be a federal crime, so why?
Theft of a mailbox can be equated to theft of property. And under Hawaii law, theft of property at the time over $300 was a felony. Theft of property under $300 was a misdemeanor. So if you look at the original paperwork, this was going to be prosecuted as a state theft charge, felony theft, which is why they lied about the make and model of the mailbox to make it a felony crime. For a federal charge, it just has to be anything to do with a mailbox makes it a federal crime. So it's called dual jurisdiction. But it's clear from the paperwork that this was investigated and prosecuted initially was going to be a state prosecution. The KLOs were going to manage the investigation, and they were going to be in control of the prosecution. It got out of their hands.
How?
That's a good question of why they couldn't get either the state prosecutor's office to prosecute it, probably because that's an obvious conflict of interest. Why the Attorney General's office, who normally would then prosecute a state case that the state prosecutor's office couldn't, why they didn't take it, I don't know.
So they did. The case was taken to them.
I believe it was, but I don't know what happened there.
Do you think there needs to be federal oversight of HPD?
That's not for me to say, but I will say this. I am very concerned about CIU from what I've learned. I think it should be disbanded or suspended pending a full review. From what I heard from the acting chief just now, The same alleged controls that were in place under Chief Kealoha are still in place now, and to me, that means there are no controls. This is a very secretive unit. They're responsible to no one, apparently, but the Chief of Police. To me, this is a very dangerous unit for a state police department to have in a democracy, and the abuse of that power and the corruption is demonstrated by this indictment. So to me, given that there is federal money involved in the CIU unit, and they're responsible for to comply with federal rules, I think at a minimum, the CIU unit needs to be, at least, if not disbanded, it needs to be suspended, its activities need to be suspended, and a full review needs to be undertaken.
What can you tell us about the prosecutor's office and their conduct throughout all of this?
The state prosecutor's office?
Yes.
On that score, I think we're going to see in the coming months a lot more to come, and I'm not going to comment on that.
Do you think there'll be more arrests?
I think there will be more arrests. I think there are more officers involved. I think there are other individuals, law enforcement individuals involved that will be eventually charged.
Including the prosecutor's office?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, so you didn't
Thanks.
raise the issue, huh?
Yeah, see you next
Finding
week.
anyone
Oh,
else.
sorry, I was talking.